Which literally means the position at which one looks at anything. It comes from the Latin word punctum visus, which literally means point sight. So it is the way the novelist sees characters and how he reveals them in his inner mind, which may differ from that of the reader. So thus, narrative point of view determines through whose perspective the story is told. So point of view enhances our ability to identify the narrator of the literary piece. So we all know that literature provides a lens through which readers look at the world. Point of view is the way the author allows you to see and hear what's going on in the story. So point of view is essentially the eyes through which a story is told. It is a narrative voice through which readers follow the story's plot, meet its characters, discover its setting, and enter into its relationships, emotions, and conflicts. So point of view allows readers to experience the story as it unfolds. So we have three major types of points of view. We have first person, the observations of the character who narrates the story. We have the third person limited, the outside narration focusing on one character's observation, and lastly we have omniscient, the all-knowing narrator outside the story itself. So we also have other types of points of view. We have second person, we have objective, we have limited omniscient, and alternating persons points of view. Let's first have the first person narration or first person point of view. The first person narration or point of view, also known as autobiographical narration, describes a situation where the protagonist speaks through the author who adopts the pronouns I and we. So with the first person narration or first person point of view, one of the novel's characters narrates the story. In short, in the first person point of view, the narrator tells the story from his or her own perspective. So you can easily recognize the first person by its use of the pronouns I and we. So the first person offers the author a great way to give the reader direct access to particular characters' thoughts, emotions, voice, and the way of seeing the world. So their point of view about the main events of the story. Here is an example of the first person point of view. We have here The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. So I was never more hated than when I tried to be honest, or when, even as just now, I've tried to articulate exactly what I felt to be the truth. No one was satisfied. In Ellison's novel, we can see that the protagonist tells his own story from the first person point of view. So this passage reflects both the power of this narrative perspective and its limitations. So by telling his own story, the protagonist is able to have a close connection with the reader and directly express his true thoughts, feelings, and ideas. However, due to this restricted form of narration, the reader must rely solely on the viewpoint of the protagonist. This puts a level of responsibility on the reader to determine whether the protagonist is reliable in his narration and to fill any gaps in the story that are ambiguous or unaddressed in a full manner by the narrator. And now let's have the third person point of view. So this mode of narration occurs when the writer does not connect himself with the other characters in the novel. In this category of narration, the narrator does not take part in the action of the story as one of the characters, but let the audience know exactly how the characters feel. So we gain the knowledge of the characters through this outside voice. In this frame of narration, the author is provided with the greatest flexibility, and as a result, it turns out to be the most commonly used narrative made in literature. So in third-person narrative mode, each character is referred to by the narrator as he, she, or they, and it. In summary, in the third-person point of view, the narrator exists outside the events of the story and relates the actions of the characters by referring to their names or by the third-person pronouns he, she, it, or they. So the third-person narration can be further classified into several types. We have the third-person omniscient, we have the third-person limited, and the third-person objectives. Here is the example of the third-person narration. So we have here The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. So she said it over and over under her breath. Free, free, free. The vacant stare and the look of terror that had followed. It went from her eyes. They stayed keen and bright. Her pulses beat fast. And the cursing blood warmed and relaxed every inch of her body. And now let's have the first type of the third-person point of view. We have the third-person limited. In the third-person limited narration, the narrator still exists outside the events of the story, but does not know the motivations or thoughts of all the characters. Rather, one character is a driver of the story, and the reader is given a closer peek into that character's psyche than the others. So the third-person limited point of view is often called the close third. So it is when the narrator sticks closely to one character but remains in the third person. So this style gives you the ability to be inside of a character's thoughts, feelings, and sensations, which can give the reader or the readers a deeper experience of character and scene. An example of the third-person limited point of view is the famous literary piece Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, written in 1999 by J.K. Rowling. It is said here, what was the good of magicking himself out of his room if Hogwarts would expel him for doing it? Yet, life at Privet Drive had reached an all-time low. Now that the Dursleys knew that they weren't going to wake up as fruit bats, he had lost his only weapon. Dobby might have saved Harry from horrible happening at Hogwarts, but the way things were going, he'd probably starve to death anyway. J.K. Rowling utilizes third-person limited narration in the Harry Potter novels. So even though the narrator is not Harry, and Harry is referred to as he, the reader is allowed into Harry's thoughts, and what he is wondering without saying out loud. So we are also like Harry, left uncertain about what other characters are thinking. We have now the second type of the third-person narration. We have the third-person omniscient. So the third-person omniscient point of view is the most open and flexible point of view available to writers. As the name implies, an omniscient narrator is all-seeing and all-knowing, while the narration outside of any one character, the narrator may occasionally access the consciousness of a few or many different characters. In short, the omniscient narrator knows everything about the story and its characters. This third-person narrator can enter in anyone's mind, move freely through time, and give the readers their own opinions and observations as well as those of the characters. This narrator also knows more than the characters. Think of the omniscient narrator as having a God's eye view of the characters. Here is an example of the third-person omniscient. We have The Little Woman, written in 1868 by Louisa May Alcott. It is said here, Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents, grumbled Joe, lying the rack. It's so dreadful to be poor, sighed Meg, looking down at her old dress. I don't think it's fair for some girls to have plenty of pretty things and other girls nothing at all, added little Amy. with an injured sniff. "We've got father and mother at each other," said Beth contentedly from the corridor. The four young faces on which the firelight shone brightened at the cheerful words, but darkened again as Joe said, sadly, "We haven't got father and shall not have him for a long time." She did it perhaps never, but each silently added, "Thinking of father far away where the fighting was." The next types of points of view will be discussed by my co-reporter, Danica Mospa. Dan, take it away.